Everyone in town believed Daniel Harper was just a poor cowboy with nothing.
The wind moved slowly across the dry plains of Texas, carrying dust over the quiet town of Red Hollow. It was the kind of place where nothing seemed to change. A few wooden buildings stood along the dirt road, horses waited beside hitching posts, and people lived simple, hard lives. Among the townsfolk was a quiet cowboy named Daniel Harper. Most people in Red Hollow believed Daniel was just a poor drifter. His clothes were old, his boots were worn, and his horse looked as tired as he did. Daniel worked wherever he could. Some days he helped fix fences on nearby ranches. Other days he hauled water, cleaned barns, or guided cattle across the open land. He never complained, never talked much, and never asked for more than a fair meal and a place in the barn to sleep. Many people in town liked Daniel, but they also pitied him. Old Martha, who ran the small general store, often gave him an extra piece of bread. "You work too hard for a man with nothing," she once said kindly. Daniel only smiled. "Ma'am, sometimes a man with nothing has more than people think." No one understood what he meant, but Daniel Harper carried a secret that could change everything. One late afternoon, Daniel rode slowly into town after a long day repairing fences for a rancher named Caleb Morris. The sun was setting behind the hills, turning the sky orange and red. As Daniel tied his horse outside the saloon to get a cup of water, loud voices echoed from inside. Two men were arguing. One of them was Sheriff Tom Wallace. The other was Caleb Morris. "I'm telling you, Sheriff," Caleb said angrily, "someone's been stealing cattle from my north pasture." 10 head gone in 2 weeks. Sheriff Wallace rubbed his beard. "Could be rustlers passing through." "No," Caleb replied. "Whoever it is knows the land too well." Daniel listened quietly from outside. His eyes narrowed slightly. That night, Daniel didn't sleep much in the barn behind the saloon. Instead, he sat quietly under the stars, thinking. Just before sunrise, he saddled his horse and rode north. The north pasture was wide and empty, stretching toward the rocky hills. Daniel moved slowly, studying the ground. After years of riding trails and working cattle, he could read tracks like a book. And what he saw told him something strange. The cattle hadn't been driven away by strangers. They had been led away carefully by someone who knew ranching. Daniel followed the tracks for miles. Eventually, they led into a narrow canyon hidden between tall rocks. Daniel stopped his horse and watched. Smoke rose, faintly, from inside the canyon. Someone was there. He rode closer, staying quiet. Soon he saw them, 3 men, and behind them stood Caleb Morris's missing cattle. Daniel recognized one of the men immediately. It was Luke Benton, a ranch hand, who worked for Caleb himself. Daniel frowned. Luke had been pretending to help search for the stolen cattle, but he was the one stealing them. Daniel knew he couldn't take 3 men alone, so he rode back to town. When he reached the sheriff's office, Sheriff Wallace looked surprised. "You've been riding all night, Daniel?" Daniel nodded. "I found your rustlers." Within an hour, the sheriff and 2 deputies rode with Daniel toward the canyon. By noon, Luke Benton and his partners were in handcuffs, sitting in the back of a wagon. The stolen cattle were safe. Back in town, people were amazed. "How did you track them?" Caleb Morris asked Daniel. Daniel simply shrugged. "Just followed the ground." From that day on, the people of Red Hollow looked at Daniel a little differently, but they still believed he was just a poor cowboy. Months passed. One evening, a black carriage rolled into town, something Red Hollow rarely saw. A well-dressed man stepped out and asked the townspeople a strange question. "I'm looking for a man named Daniel Harper." Soon the man found Daniel sitting outside the general store, repairing a saddle. "Mr. Harper," the stranger said politely. "My name is Edward Langley. I've been searching for you." Daniel looked calm, but his eyes were careful. "Have you now?" "Yes," Langley said. "Your father asked me to find you." Daniel slowly stood. Most people in town froze when they heard those words. "Your father," Sheriff Wallace repeated. Langley nodded. "Jonathan Harper passed away last month. He owned the Harper Rail Company, one of the largest rail companies in the country." The entire street went silent. Langley continued. "You, Daniel Harper, are the only heir to his fortune." Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. "A fortune? The poor cowboy." Caleb Morris stared at Daniel in disbelief. "You are telling me this drifter is rich?" Langley opened a leather folder and handed Daniel several documents. Weighed by the leather folder and handed Daniel several documents. "Not just rich," he said quietly. "One of the wealthiest men in the western states." Daniel read the papers slowly. Then he folded them. People waited for his reaction, but Daniel only sighed. "I figured this day might come." Sheriff Wallace looked stunned. "You knew?" Daniel nodded. "My father and I, we didn't see the world the same way. He wanted me to run railroads and sit in big offices. I wanted to live free." "So you ran away?" Martha asked. "Not exactly," Daniel said. "I left to learn what life really looks like." He looked around the town. Dusty streets, hard-working people, simple lives. "I wanted to know how real folks live, not rich men in fancy suits." Langley cleared his throat. "Mr. Harper, the company board is waiting. You must return east immediately." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "Not yet." The crowd gasped. Langley blinked. "Not yet." Daniel smiled slightly. "I've got fences to finish fixing for Caleb, and Martha still needs help unloading supply wagons tomorrow." People laughed softly in disbelief. "You're worth millions," Caleb said. "Why would you keep working?" Daniel looked at him calmly. "Because money doesn't make a man worth more than honest work." The town grew quiet. Over the next few weeks, word spread about the cowboy with the hidden fortune. But Daniel didn't change. He still wore the same boots, still worked the same ranch jobs, still helped neighbors. Except now people understood something they hadn't before. Daniel Harper had never been poor. He had simply chosen a richer life. Not one filled with gold, but one filled with purpose, freedom, and honest people. Months later, Daniel finally left Red Hollow to take control of the Harper Rail Company. But before leaving, he quietly paid off the debts of several struggling ranchers. He repaired the town school, and he built a new well, so the town would never run dry. When Daniel rode away at sunrise, the whole town stood in the street watching. Sheriff Wallace tipped his hat. "Guess the poorest cowboy we knew was the richest man all along." Martha smiled. "No," she said softly. "He was just the wisest."